Dozens of protesters were detained by police in Atlanta yesterday following an attack at the site of a new police training center. Hundreds of activists breached the site, setting construction vehicles on fire and throwing bricks and Molotov cocktails. The planned complex is located in DeKalb County, just outside of Atlanta, and it would include spaces where law enforcement officers can simulate shootouts and high-speed chases. Opponents of the center are calling it Cop City. So I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Skyler Henry, who's on the ground in Atlanta, to talk a little bit more about this. This has been the target of it's been a while now, several weeks of protests. What do police say happened last night?
Hey, Anne-Marie, good to see you. Well, essentially, they say that 35 agitators were detained, their words, for throwing bricks and other items, Molotov cocktails and the like, at officers at the construction site where this police training facility, public training facility, will be located right outside of the city limits, so much so that the entire construction site was on lockdown overnight as police looked to calm the tensions happening there in the city limits. We should point out a little bit that this is just the latest in a series of incidents that have happened there. A series of protests and demonstrations have happened over the course of the last few months, calling for an end to the development of this Cop City. That's been the nickname here. But the city of Atlanta, as well as public officials here, say that this is a facility that has been long overdue. As you mentioned, this would be an area where officers can not only train for first emergency responses, but also help firefighters as well. There's high-speed chase locations where officers will be able to maneuver their vehicles. There's also classrooms, movie theaters, a nightclub even, where officers would be able to train and figure out how they will be able to get into these facilities. Now, this was all created in large part due to what we saw in 2020 in terms of the protests and demonstrations and unrest following the death of George Floyd. That is what triggered this response. And so now that we're seeing this development, outrage has almost been imminent from a group of people saying that they want to defend the Atlanta forest, where this police facility would essentially be located. It's some 85 acres or so, a $90 million price tag. Many of those who say that they want to defend the forest say that this is essentially the militarization of the police department, and they want to preserve the forest, and they simply do not want this in their backyard.
And so remind us again, Skyler, because one of the things that will be interesting is Atlanta is one of the cities that would like to host the Democratic National Convention. President hasn't made that choice as to which city is going to do that. But remind us what the purpose of this proposed training facility is and what that would mean if the DNC is held there.
Yeah, well, we're talking about a facility that essentially would serve for departments and law enforcement agencies, not only here in the state of Georgia, but around the region as well, that would be able to come here, come to this facility and properly train to respond to emergencies that happen in all forms. I talked about the classrooms and nightclubs. Unfortunately, those have been incidents where we've seen mass shootings and other instances happen where officers have needed to respond to. And so officials here believe that having this training facility in place would essentially allow officers to be better prepared and able to respond better. But we should also mention that firefighters and other EMT officials will be here as well. And that is the other part of this that I think a lot of people have been concerned about, if you will, essentially saying that they want more officers to be trained to respond to instances like this, but they do not want this to be so expensive, to be so vast. I mentioned how large it is. It's 85 acres of land here, meaning that they will be cutting down a huge chunk of the forest. It's right outside of Atlanta. It's in DeKalb County, which is the suburb in the metro Atlanta area. And so this property is actually, it was an old prison yard farm sort of area there that has been unused for quite some time, but it is largely a forest at this point. But now the construction area will knock a lot of that down, and then obviously this training facility would be in place. Now, Vlad, you talked about what this would potentially mean for the Democrats in terms of a possible site for 2024. I think everyone certainly wants to have that be in their host city. But it'll be interesting to see what the rhetoric is around defending the police. We know that President Biden is someone who's said against that sort of slogan, saying that it is actually appropriate to properly fully fund law enforcement officers and the like. And so if this plays into that at all, not sure. We know that Atlanta's mayor is developing a task force to try to ease the community into this, address some of their concerns. He announced that last week, and so that task force should be coming in the next few weeks or so. As for the names of those 35 agitators, this is something else that I think we should keep in mind, especially when we're covering instances like this. A lot of people say that these things potentially draw people from out of town to, rile up these protests. Police say that they will be releasing the names and where these people may have come from sometime today.
I'm glad you sort of addressed that, because when you were explaining the sort of various reasons why people were opposed to this, there's quite a range from like environmental to concerns about policing. So I was going to say, who are these protesters?
There's a lot.
And hopefully we'll get a little more insight once those names are released.
You got it. Yeah, I was going to say, checking every single box there. It's a little bit of not in my backyard, if you will, in terms of the environment, but then you also have the concerns about the over-militarization of police here as well. There are also other concerns where people say that space could be used for something more productive for the community, park space, potentially businesses and something else like that. And so I think a lot of people have a vested interest in this particular plot of land, but unfortunately, the clash is between protesters and law enforcement because this police training center appears to be coming.
All right, Skyler Henry for us in Atlanta. Skyler, as always, thank you, my friend.